You know that feeling when you finally press submit on a 20-page paper at 11:59 p.m. and your brain just turns to static? That distinct mixture of relief and nausea? That was me. I was running on dry shampoo, 3 days of sleep deprivation, and a Red Bull that was doing more harm than good. All I wanted was to walk the 6 blocks home, collapse face first onto my mattress, and sleep for a decade. But the universe had other plans. Specifically, a pair of heavy boots echoing behind me that definitely weren't following the beat of my playlist. Let me back up for a second so you understand why. I, Samantha, a 20-year-old architecture student who usually lives in oversized hoodies, was walking alone at midnight dressed like a folklore dancer. It was the closing night of the Feria de las Flores, the flower festival. It's the 1 week a year when Medellin explodes with color. I had been part of the university's cultural showcase. I was wearing this traditional white blouse, the campesina style, with intricate red and blue embroidery along the neckline, and a long, heavy black skirt that swished around my ankles with every step. At 8 p.m., I felt beautiful. I felt connected to my roots. But by midnight, after panic typing my thesis in a costume closet because the campus library closed early, I just felt exposed. The air was thick, that sticky, tropical humidity that wraps around you like a wet blanket. The city was winding down. The music from the main plaza was just a dull throb in the distance, like a fading heartbeat. I had my laptop bag slung across my chest, the strap digging into my shoulder. It contained my life's work. If I lost that laptop, I lost my degree. I turned onto Carrera 43. It's a street I've walked 1,000 times. Usually it's safe. Usually there are street vendors selling arepas and couples walking their dogs. But tonight, the streetlights were flickering, buzzing with that angry electric hum. Street was empty, except for the footsteps. I first noticed them about 2 blocks from the campus gate. At first, your brain tries to protect you. You rationalize it. You think, oh, it's just another guy walking home. Or maybe he lives in my building. You force yourself not to look back because looking back makes it real. Looking back acknowledges that there is a hunter and there is prey. But the rhythm was wrong. I was walking fast my I just want to go home walk. Fast, clipped steps. Click, click, click. The footsteps behind me weren't rushing, but they were keeping pace. They were heavy, deliberate. It sounded like wet leather scraping against concrete. I tested it. I slowed down near a closed bakery, pretending to check my reflection in the window. The footsteps stopped. I didn't see a reflection of a guy walking past. I saw nothing. Just the dark street behind me in the glass. He had stopped in the shadows of the overhang, just out of the light. That's when the cold water hit my stomach. You know that sensation? It starts at the base of your spine and shoots up to your neck, making the little hairs stand up. It's primal. It's your DNA screaming, run. I pulled my phone out of my woven bag. My fingers were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I pressed the side button. Nothing. Black screen. The Red Bull. The hotspot usage. I had drained the battery uploading the file. Stupid. Samantha. Stupid. Stupid, stupid. I whispered to myself, clutching the dead brick of metal like it could still save me. I started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps started again instantly. Closer now, less subtle. He wasn't trying to hide it anymore. He wanted me to hear him. He wanted me to know he was there. It's a power move. It's psychological warfare before the physical attack. I turned right, heading toward the park. The park was a gamble, a massive gamble. During the day, it's beautiful kids playing, old men playing chess. At night, it's a labyrinth of shadows. But I knew if I cut through the park, I could get to the main avenue where the taxis were. If I stayed on the side streets, he could corner me. I ducked under the stone archway. The temperature dropped immediately. The smell of exhaust was replaced by the smell of damp earth and rotting flowers. The gravel crunched loudly under my sandals. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Behind me, crunch, crunch, crunch. He was sprinting now. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back and saw his face, I think I would have frozen. I just hiked up my heavy skirt with one hand, clutching my laptop bag with the other, and I ran. I ran past the empty swing sets that creaked in the wind. I ran past the fountain that had been turned off for the night. My breath was tearing at my throat. My lungs were burning. I could hear him breathing now, a wet, raspy sound, like air being sucked through a broken straw. He was close, maybe 10 feet. I saw a light ahead. Gazebo. It was this old colonial-style structure in the center of the park, an octagon with a high roof and a single yellow security light buzzing overhead. It looked like a stage spotlight in the middle of a black void, and there was someone standing in it. I didn't think. I didn't assess the danger. When you're drowning, you don't check if the driftwood is clean before you grab it. You just grab it. I burst into the circle of light, my sandals skidding on the smooth concrete floor of the gazebo. "Please!" The word ripped out of my throat, raw and desperate. The man turned around. Everything stopped. The air left the gazebo. The man standing there, he wasn't a park security guard. He wasn't a late-night jogger. He looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine cover, if the magazine was GQ, Cartel edition. He was wearing a beige linen suit that probably cost more than my entire tuition. His shirt was silk, unbuttoned just enough to show a gold chain that caught the yellow light. His hair was slicked back, severe and perfect. But it was his eyes. They were dark, bottomless, and completely devoid of surprise. He looked at me sweaty, terrified, hyperventilating in a folk dance dress, and he didn't blink. He looked like a shark that had just had a sardine jump into its tank. Behind him, in the shadows of the trees further back, I saw 2 other men, massive, arms crossed, watching. I had jumped out of the frying pan and into a volcano. But then I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. The stalker. He was right there. I made a choice, a crazy, insane, adrenaline-fueled choice. I threw myself at the man in the suit. I grabbed his arm. His bicep was like a steel cable under that expensive silk, and I pressed my shaking body against his side. I looked up at him, my eyes pleading, begging him to read my mind. "Baby, I'm so sorry I'm late," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "My phone died and I got lost, but I'm here. I'm here." I squeezed his arm, digging my fingernails into the fabric. "Play along," I screamed with my eyes. "Please, God, just play along." The man looked down at me. He looked at my hand on his arm. He looked at my terrified face. For a second that stretched out for an eternity, he didn't move. I thought he was going to shove me away. I thought he was going to signal those men in the shadows to drag me off. I could smell his cologne. It smelled like sandalwood, tobacco, and something metallic, like rain on hot pavement. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something else. Amusement? Curiosity? He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted his weight. He lifted his other hand, the one holding a lit cigar, and took a slow drag, never taking his eyes off mine. He exhaled the smoke to the side, then looked up, over my shoulder, into the darkness where the gravel was crunching. "You're late," he said. His voice was deep, rough like gravel in a mixer. It vibrated through his chest and into my shoulder. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the situation. He looked past me. "And you brought a friend?" I turned my head slowly, still clutching the stranger's arm like a lifeline. Standing at the edge of the gazebo's light was the man who had been following me. Up close, he was even worse than I had imagined. He was twitchy, gaunt, wearing a dirty denim jacket. His eyes were wide, dilated, darting between me and the man in the suit. He held a knife in his right hand, a rusty, jagged thing that caught the light. But he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the man I was holding on to. And for the first time since the campus gates, the look on the stalker's face wasn't hunger. It was recognition, and it was pure, unadulterated terror. I felt the man in the suit tense up. Not like he was scared, like a coil winding tight. He took his hand, the one with the cigar, and gently, almost tenderly, placed it on my shoulder. It felt heavy, possessive. "Go sit on the bench, Corita," the man in the suit said to me, his voice drop, dead calm. "Let me handle our guest." "You interrupted my smoke." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a growl. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the casual indifference of a man commenting on the weather. But in that gazebo, under the buzzing yellow light, it sounded like a death sentence. I was pressed back against the cold concrete bench, my knees pulled up to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. I watched the stalker, this man who had been a terrifying predator just 30 seconds ago. A monster who had hunted me through the dark streets of Medellin was now shrinking. He looked like a child who had broken a vase in a museum. His hand, the one holding the rusty knife, was trembling so violently that the blade rattled against the metal railing of the gazebo. Clink, clink, clink. "Patron," the stalker stammered, his voice cracking. He took another step back, his boots scraping on the stone. I was just leaving. I didn't mean no disrespect. I swear on my mother, Patron." The boss didn't answer immediately. He took another slow drag of his cigar, the cherry glowing bright orange in the dim light. He exhaled a thick plume of smoke that drifted toward the stalker, ghosting around his face. Then, with a movement so fluid it looked choreographed, the boss held out his hand, palm up, expectant. "The toy?" the boss said softly. "Give it to me." The stalker hesitated for a fraction of a second. In that moment, I saw the animal instinct war with the fear. He tightened his grip on the knife. I blinked. That was my mistake. If I hadn't blinked, maybe I would have seen how a man in a linen suit could move faster than a striking cobra. There was a sickening crack. By the time my eyes opened, the stalker was on his knees, his mouth open in a silent scream of agony. The boss was standing over him, perfectly poised, not a wrinkle in his jacket. He had the stalker's wrist twisted at an unnatural angle backward, forcing the palm open. The rusty knife clattered to the floor, spinning and coming to rest against the toe of the boss's polished loafer. But that wasn't the shocking part. Violence? In Medellin? You grow up knowing violence is a language spoken here. No. What shocked me, what made the bile rise in my throat, was what happened next. The boss didn't kick him. He didn't yell. He reached into his own breast pocket and pulled out a pristine, white silk handkerchief. He leaned down, almost tenderly, and wiped the sweat and tears from the stalker's contorted face. It was a gesture of care, grotesque in its context. "Shh," the boss whispered, like he was soothing a crying infant. "Noise brings police. Police bring paperwork. And I hate paperwork." The stalker choked back a sob, nodding frantically, snot and tears mixing on his face. He cradled his broken wrist against his chest. The boss stood up, folding the handkerchief carefully, though he didn't put it back in his pocket. He dropped it onto the stalker's shoulder. "You have until sunrise," the boss said, his voice bored again. "Not to leave the park, to leave the valley. If my boys see you in Antioquia tomorrow." He let the sentence hang there, heavy and unfinished. He kicked the rusty knife. It skittered across the floor and vanished into the bushes. Go. The stalker didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling, cradling his arm, and sprinted into the darkness. He ran faster than he had when he was chasing me. We listened to his footsteps fade, crunching gravel, then silence. And then there were 2. Well, 5, if you counted the statues in the shadows. The bodyguards hadn't moved a muscle. They were part of the scenery, like the trees. The boss turned around. He looked at the empty space where the stalker had been. Then he looked at his cigar. And finally, he looked at me. The adrenaline crash hit me like a freight train. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. My teeth chattered. I realized, with horror, that I was now alone in a park at midnight, with a man who snapped wrists like dry twigs. I had used a shark to eat a piranha, and now the shark was hungry. He walked toward me. "Get up!" my brain screamed. "Run!" But my legs were jelly. I was glued to that bench. He stopped 2 feet away. Up close, He smelled expensive. Sandalwood, leather, and that sharp, metallic scent of ozone. He looked at my face, his eyes scanning my features with a detached, clinical curiosity. He looked at my hands, gripping my woven bag so hard my knuckles were blue. He looked at the cheap folklore dress, the mud on the hem, the sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. "So," he said, the gravel in his voice rumbling low. "My girlfriend." He said the word with a dry amusement, tilting his head. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. I didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He took a final drag of the cigar and then dropped it, crushing it out with his heel. "You have survival instincts. That is rare. Most people freeze. You improvised." He reached out a hand. I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut, expecting a strike, expecting to be grabbed. "To stand up, Nina," he said, "unless you plan to sleep on the concrete." I opened one eye. His hand was open, palm up, no weapons, just a manicured hand with a heavy gold ring on the pinky. I hesitated, then reached out. My trembling hand touched his. His grip was firm, dry, and shockingly warm. He pulled me to my feet with zero effort, like I weighed nothing more than a feather, but he didn't let go immediately. He held my hand for a second longer than necessary. Looking at my wrist where my cheap plastic watch used to be, I must have lost it when I ran. "Samantha." I blurted out. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to be a person to him, not just a loose end. "My name is Samantha." He released my hand. "Samantha," he repeated, testing the weight of the name. "I am Dawn. Well, you can call me Julian. Julian, a normal name. A name for an accountant or a baker, not for the wolf of the park." "Come," he said, turning his back on me and walking toward the park exit without checking if I was following. "I will drive you home." "No!" The word came out too loud. No, thank you. I can walk. I live close, really." He stopped and half turned. "You think the rat that ran away is the only rat in this city?" He raised an eyebrow. "Or do you think you are safer walking alone than you are with me?" It wasn't a question. It was a logic puzzle, and the answer was terrifyingly obvious. I tightened my grip on my laptop bag and followed him. The walk to the cars was a blur. The bodyguards formed a phalanx around us, two in front, two behind. I felt like a prisoner of war, or maybe a very confused diplomat. When we reached the curb, there were 3 SUVs, black, glossy, massive, the kind that look like they eat Toyota Corollas for breakfast. A driver stepped out of the middle one, the lead vehicle, and opened the back door. The boss, Julian, gestured for me to get in. I climbed up into the leather interior. It was air-conditioned, cool and crisp, smelling of new car and vanilla. The silence inside was absolute. The heavy door thudded shut, sealing us in. It felt like entering a vault. Julian slid in beside me. The lock clicked. Thunk. "Where to?" he asked, leaning back and crossing his legs. "Barrio Antioquia," I whispered. "Near the airport." He tapped on the partition glass. The driver nodded, and the car began to glide forward. No lurching, no bumps, just smooth, powerful movement. The silence in the SUV wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air inside a submarine deeper than it was built to go. While the city of Medellin streamed past the tinted windows, a blur of neon signs, street vendors packing up their stalls, and the weary faces of commuters waiting for buses that were always late, the world inside this leather-clad capsule felt suspended in a different reality. It was a vacuum, scrubbed clean of the humidity and the noise, leaving only the scent of expensive vanilla and the underlying threat of violence. Julian, the man who had just snapped a stalker's wrist as easily as one snaps a dry twig, was scrolling through his phone with a terrifying casualness. He tapped a message, swiped it away, and locked the screen, sliding the device into the breast pocket of his beige linen suit. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. I could feel his attention like a physical weight pressing against my temple. It was the gravitational pull of a black hole. You didn't have to see it to know it was going to tear you apart. "You are shaking," he said. His voice was low, barely vibrating the air, yet it drowned out the hum of the engine. I'm just coming down from the adrenaline. I lied. My voice sounded thin, foreign to my own ears. I wasn't just coming down. I was crashing. My hands were vibrating in my lap, clutching the strap of my mochila bag like it was a parachute cord, and I was in free fall. My heart was still hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, thump, 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 a reminder that 5 minutes ago, I was prey. Adrenaline is a fuel, he murmured, turning his head slowly. The passing streetlights cast rhythmic shadows across the sharp angles of his face, revealing the scars one by one, a map of violence etched into skin. Most people burn dirty. They get jitters. They get sick. They make mistakes. They freeze. He looked at me then, his eyes dark and unreadable. You, however, you utilized it. You turned fear into performance. That is not common. He reached into the center console cooler, but not for water this time. He pulled out a small, hammered silver flask. He unscrewed the cap, and the sharp, sweet smell of aged rum filled the sterile air. Conditioning. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving mine, then offered it to me. I hesitated. Taking a drink felt like sealing a pact. But my hands were shaking so bad I thought my teeth might rattle out of my skull. I took the flask. The metal was cold. I took a sip. The rum burned all the way down, a liquid fire that shocked my system back into focus. Tell me, Samantha, he said, taking the flask back. What were you really thinking in that gazebo? When you saw me? When you saw the knife? I swallowed hard, the taste of rum lingering on my tongue. I was thinking I didn't want to die. No, he corrected gently, as if he were a professor correcting a thesis. That is what you were feeling. Self-preservation is an instinct. A dog feels that. A rat feels that. I asked what you were thinking. There is a difference. An animal feels. A human thinks. You made a calculation. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Up close, he didn't look like a monster. He looked exhausted. There was a weariness in the corners of his eyes that money couldn't hide. I thought that a known danger is better than an unknown one. The man following me was chaos. He was twitchy, unpredictable. He wanted to hurt me because he could. I took a breath, steadying myself. You looked like order. Scary order. Violent order. But order. And I figured order has rules. Chaos doesn't. Julian smiled. It was a slow, creeping expression that didn't quite reach his eyes, but it softened the hardness of his face. Order, he repeated, tasting the word like a fine wine. I like that. My enemies call me a tyrant. The police call me a criminal. But you call me order. He leaned back, crossing his legs, the fabric of his expensive trousers rustling softly. He looked out the window again. You study architecture, yes? You build things. You create spaces where people live, sleep, eat. You create rules. Walls are rules. Doors are permissions. A window is a suggestion. He turned back to me. You are more like me than you think, Samantha. I build homes, I argued, a spark of defiance cutting through my fear. I design libraries and schools. I don't break people's arms in parks. I didn't break his arm, Julian said dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting a fly. I realigned his priorities. And do not pretend, moral superiority architect. When you design a building, do you not decide who enters and who is kept out? Do you not build fences? Do you not install locks? Do you not design lobbies to intimidate and bedrooms to comfort? You dictate movement. You control the flow of bodies through space. We are in the same business. I just enforce my walls with different materials. The car hit a pothole, the first bump I had felt in the armored beast. The driver muttered a curse in Spanish, checking the rearview mirror. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I'm nobody. I'm a scholarship student with a dead phone. Because, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt louder than a shout, most people look at me and see a monster. They see the gun, the money, the rumor. They see the wolf. You looked at me and saw a tool. You saw a lever you could pull to save your own skin. That is rare. It is cold. It is pragmatic. He leaned in closer, the scent of sandalwood and tobacco enveloping me. It makes me wonder what else you are capable of when the walls close in, when the blueprint fails, when the structure collapses. I'm just a student, I insisted, though the words felt hollow even to me. I write papers. I make models out of balsa wood and glue. For now, he whispered, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. But the world has a way of breaking models. The world is heavy, Samantha. And when the balsa wood snaps, we see what the steel underneath is made of. The car slowed down. We were turning onto my street. My stomach knotted. My street, my reality. The SUV looked like a spaceship landing in a swamp. The buildings here were peeling, the sidewalks cracked. There was a stray dog sleeping on my front step, old Samson, who only had 3 legs. The driver pulled up right in front of my apartment complex. The contrast was painful. This multi-million-dollar fortress on wheels idling next to a building where the buzzer hadn't worked since 2010. Thank you, I said, clutching my bag. Really? You saved my life. I saved your night, he corrected. Your life is your own problem to solve. The driver opened my door. The humidity and noise of the street rushed in, breaking the spell. I stepped out. My legs felt heavy but steady. I turned back to say one last thing. Maybe ask him why he was really in the park, but he was already looking back at his phone. Wait, he said. Just as I was about to close the door, I froze. He reached into his jacket pocket again. I flinched, thinking of the handkerchief, thinking of the knife, but he pulled out a card. A simple, matte black card with a single white phone number printed on it. No name, no logo, just digits. He held it out to me. You owe me, Samantha, he said. I don't do free favors. I don't do charity. You used my name. You used my protection. That creates a debt. My heart hammered against my ribs. A debt? I don't have money. I'm a student. I don't want your money, he interrupted, his eyes locking onto mine. But one day, I might need a builder, or a dreamer, or maybe just a good liar. He flicked the card. It spun through the air and landed in my open palm. When I call, he said, and his voice dropped to a whisper that cut through the noise of the street, you pick up. The door slammed shut. Thump! I stood there on the cracked sidewalk, the black card burning a hole in my hand as the 3 SUVs peeled away, dissolving into the metal and night like smoke. Old Samson, the dog, lifted his head, barked once, and went back to sleep. I was safe. I was home. But as I looked down at the number on the card, I realized the stalker in the park had been the least of my problems. I hadn't just escaped a predator. I had made a deal with the devil. And the devil always comes to collect. 3 weeks. If you've never waited for a cartel boss to call in a favor, you don't know what true silence sounds like. It's not peaceful. It's the silence of a held breath. It's the silence of a seismograph right before the needle jumps off the paper. For 21 days, I lived in a state of hyper-vigilant purgatory. The black card Julian had given me sat in my nightstand drawer, buried under a pile of unmatched socks. I didn't look at it, but I could feel it. It felt radioactive. I imagined it glowing in the dark, pulsing with a low-frequency hum that only I could hear. I tried to go back to my life. I really did. I went to my studio classes. I glued tiny plastic trees onto foam core boards. I argued with my professors about brutalist aesthetics versus modern functionality. But it all felt like I was acting in a play where I hadn't learned the lines, and everyone else was reading from a different script. The library became a torture chamber. I used to love the library, the smell of old paper, the dust motes dancing in the light. Now, I sat there trying to read about urban density in the 20th century, but every time the automatic doors whooshed open, I jumped. Every time a student dropped a book, I flinched. I found myself sitting with my back to the wall, scanning the room, categorizing exits, counting steps to the door. I wasn't studying architecture anymore. I was studying escape routes. My friends noticed. Of course they noticed. You're twitchy, Sammy. My best friend Lucia said one afternoon while we were drinking coffee in the campus square. She reached out to touch my arm and I practically leaped out of my skin. "You keep checking the perimeter. Who do you think is coming for you, the Batman?" I laughed, but it sounded brittle, like cracking glass. "Just stress. Final year. You know how it is. The thesis is eating my brain." But I wasn't checking for Batman. I was checking for beige linen suits. I was checking for black SUVs with tinted windows that swallowed the light. The paranoia started to warp my reality. I'd be walking to the grocery store and a car would slow down near me. My heart would hammer a frantic rhythm against my ribs, thump, 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 until the car passed. It was just an Uber looking for a passenger, just a mom picking up her kids. But in my head, every slowing vehicle was a collection agency for the devil. The worst moment wasn't at school. It was at home. My parents had invited me over for Sunday dinner. Sancocho, thick and hearty, the smell filling the small apartment I grew up in. My dad was telling a joke about a fisherman. My mom was laughing, spooning rice onto my plate. It was a scene of perfect domestic safety. And I felt like an alien. I looked at their hands soft, worn from honest work. I looked at their smiles open, unguarded. They didn't know that 3 miles away, men in armored cars were deciding who lived and who died. They didn't know that their daughter had shaken hands with the man who pulled the strings. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and tell them to wake up, to lock the doors, to run. But I just ate my soup. I smiled. I lied. The duality was tearing me apart. By day, I was Samantha Valderrama, honor student. By night, I was a debtor to the wolf. It came to a head on a rainy Friday. I was at a dive bar with a group of engineering students. The place was loud, smelling of stale beer and wet wool. A guy I didn't know, some friend of a friend, got too drunk. He started getting aggressive, bumping into people, shouting slurs. He bumped into me, spilling his beer down my shirt. "Watch it, bitch," he snarled, looming over me. He was big, fleshy, his eyes swimming with cheap aguardiente. Old Samantha would have apologized. Old Samantha would have shrunk away, dried off in the bathroom, and gone home to cry about how mean the world was. But I wasn't old Samantha anymore. I had seen what real power looked like, and this sloppy drunk wasn't it. This wasn't a wolf. This was a yapping dog. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stared right into his bloodshot eyes, channeling the cold, dead calm I had seen in the gazebo. I imagined Julian standing behind me, his hand on my shoulder, whispering, "Order." "Sit down," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a razor wire edge to it. It cut through the noise of the bar. The guy blinked, confused by the lack of fear. He expected a victim. He got a wall. "What did you say to me?" I said, "Sit down," I repeated, leaning in slightly, invading his space. "Before you make a mistake that follows you home." It was a bluff, a total hollow bluff. I had no backup. I had no skills, but I held his gaze. I didn't blink. For a second, I wasn't just a student. I was the girl who had survived the park. The guy hesitated. He looked at my face, really looked at it, and saw something that sobered him up just enough. Fear, respect? Or maybe just the realization that he had picked the wrong target. He grunted, muttered something about crazy chicks, and stumbled away to the other side of the bar. My hands were shaking under the table, but my heart was beating slow and steady. That was the moment I knew I couldn't go back. The die was cast, the ink was in the water. I wasn't just waiting for the call anymore. I was anticipating it. I was bored by the safety. I craved the storm. So when the phone finally buzzed in structural dynamics class 4 days later, I didn't feel fear. I felt relieved. The waiting was over. The bill had arrived. It finally happened on a Tuesday. Tuesday afternoons were supposed to be safe. They were for Structural Dynamics 201, a class so boring it could sedate a rhino. I was sitting in the back of the lecture hall, listening to Professor Hineo drone on about load-bearing walls, when my phone vibrated on the desk. Not a text, a call. Unknown caller. The room went silent. Well, the professor was still talking, but for me, the sound vacuumed out of the world. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the green button. I could let it ring. I could ignore it. I could pretend I was just a student and not a girl who owed a debt to a wolf. But you don't ghost the devil. I grabbed my bag, ignored the professor's annoyed glare, and walked out of the lecture hall. I answered in the hallway, my voice echoing off the linoleum. "Hello? Structural dynamics," a voice said. It wasn't Julian. It was the driver. "You are learning about how things stand up. We need you to tell us how they fall down." What? Curbside. North exit. You have 60 seconds. The line went dead. I didn't think. I moved. It was like muscle memory I didn't know I had. I ran down the stairs, bursting out into the blinding afternoon sun. And there it was, the black armored SUV, idling like a sleek, dark beast among the beat-up student cars. The back door clicked open. I got in. This time, Julian wasn't inside. The back seat was empty, save for a leather portfolio case. The air conditioning was freezing. We drove for 20 minutes, climbing higher into the hills, up toward the rich district of El Poblado. We didn't stop at a mansion. We stopped at a construction site. It was a skeleton of a skyscraper, a massive grid of steel and concrete rising out of the jungle. Dust swirled in the air. The noise of jackhammers was deafening. The driver led me to the construction elevator, one of those rattling cages that run up the side of the building. We rode it up. Floor 10, floor 20, floor 30. The city shrank below us until the cars looked like toys and the people vanished entirely. When the cage opened on the top floor, the wind hit me. It was fierce, whipping my hair across my face. The floor was just a slab of concrete, open to the elements, no walls yet. Julian was standing at the edge, looking out over the sprawling valley of Medellin. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was wearing a hard hat and a high-visibility vest over a black dress shirt. He looked like the owner of the world, surveying his kingdom. He turned as I stepped off the elevator. "Samantha," he yelled over the wind. "You made good time." "You pulled me out of class," I shouted back, clutching my bag. "I have a midterm next week." He laughed. It was a sharp, genuine sound. "If you pass this test, I'll buy the university and give you an A." He waved me over to a makeshift table made of plywood and sawhorses. It was covered in large blue sheets of paper, blueprints. "I need a builder," he said, his face suddenly serious. He tapped the paper. "This is a warehouse in the industrial district. It belongs to a competitor, a man who lacks my appreciation for quiet." I looked at the blueprints. They were complex. Thick walls, reinforced entry points. It was a fortress. "He is storing something of mine inside," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. "I want to go in and get it back, but my men say it's impenetrable. Blast doors, motion sensors, 20 armed guards at the perimeter. If we try to kick the door down, it becomes a war zone. And as I told you, I hate noise." He looked at me, his dark eyes intense. "You are an architect. You look at structures and see the logic. Look at this. Find me the mistake. Find me the way in that isn't a door." My mouth went dry. "Julian, I design libraries. I don't plan heists. Architecture is architecture," he snapped. "It is math. It is physics. And it is human error. Find the error." I looked at the blueprints again. My hands were shaking, but then my training took over. I stopped seeing a fortress. I saw lines. I saw HVAC systems. I saw load distribution. I traced the lines with my finger. "The walls are reinforced concrete," I muttered, half to myself. 2 feet thick. You can't blow through those without bringing the roof down." "Correct," Julian said, watching me. I moved my finger to the ventilation. "The HVAC intake is on the roof, but the ducts are too narrow for a person." "We checked that," he confirmed. I stared at the foundation plans. It was an old building, retrofitted. And then I saw it. A discrepancy. A tiny, boring detail that a soldier would miss, but an architect would catch. "Here," I said, tapping a section near the southwest corner. "The drainage system." Julian leaned in, smelling of expensive cologne and concrete dust. "What about it?" This building used to be a textile factory in the 50 seconds, I explained, my voice gaining confidence. See this line? It's an old industrial runoff tunnel. When they renovated for the warehouse, they poured concrete over the floor, but they didn't fill the tunnel. They just capped it. I looked up at him. The tunnel runs right under the main storage floor. The concrete slab there is thinner because of the hollow space underneath. Maybe 4 inches. Julian stared at the map. Then he looked at me. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't the scary smile from the gazebo. It was a smile of genuine respect. 4 inches, he whispered. We can cut through that in 3 minutes with a diamond saw. Silent, from below. He looked up at the driver who was standing by the elevator. Get the team. We go in through the sewers. He turned back to me. The wind whipped his vest, but he stood like a statue. You are good. You are very good. I felt a flush of pride. It was sickening, and it was intoxicating. I had just helped a cartel boss plan a raid. I should be horrified. But standing there, on top of the city, solving a puzzle that his army of tough guys couldn't crack, I felt powerful. Is the debt paid? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Julian's expression shifted. He looked past me toward the elevator. His eyes narrowed. The debt? He said, distracted. Yes, the debt is... He stopped. He tilted his head, like a dog hearing a whistle. Get down, he said. What? Get down! He tackled me. It wasn't graceful. He hit me like a linebacker, driving his shoulder into my stomach and slamming me onto the dusty concrete floor. A split second later, the air where my head had been exploded. Ping, ZZZT. A bullet sparked off the steel girder behind us. Then came the sound a delayed crack from a sniper rifle miles away. Stay down, Julian roared, covering my head with his hand. He was pressing me into the dirt, his body a heavy shield over mine. More shots. Ping, ping. They were hitting the floor around us, kicking up clouds of concrete dust. The elevator! The driver screamed, pulling a submachine gun from under his jacket. They have the elevator sighted! Julian yelled back. He looked at me, his face inches from mine. There was concrete dust in his eyelashes. He wasn't scared. He was furious. My competitor. He didn't wait for me to come to him. He looked around the open floor. We were trapped. 30 stories up. Sniper fire pinning us down. No walls. The elevator was a death trap. The crane! I screamed, pointing to the yellow mass towering over the abyss. Too exposed. Julian roared back, tackling me as another bullet pulverized the concrete pillar next to us, spraying us with gray dust. They have the angle. We'd be target practice before we hit the 3rd rung. Think, architect, think! My mind raced, cycling through the blueprints I had memorized. The blue lines glowed in my mind like neon. I had told him about the tunnel entrance in the warehouse, but I hadn't mentioned the drainage outflow for this construction site. I had seen it on the elevator right up a grate in the unfinished basement level. But we were on the 30th floor. The trash chute! I yelled, grabbing his vest and pulling his face close to mine. The construction debris chute. It goes straight to the dumpster in the basement. Julian looked at the large yellow plastic tube strapped to the side of the building. It was meant for rubble, broken bricks, and rebar. It was narrow, jagged, and dark. A plastic throat leading to hell. It will tear us apart, he said, looking at the black maw of the tube. Better than a bullet in the head. I countered, the wind whipping my hair into my eyes. He looked at me. He grinned. That wild, terrifying grin that made him look more animal than man. Ladies first. I didn't hesitate. I threw my bag in, jumped onto the lip of the chute, crossed my arms over my chest like a corpse, and dropped. The darkness swallowed me instantly. The slide was a nightmare of friction and noise. The plastic rattled violently as I plummeted down 30 stories, a chaotic descent through a claustrophobic tunnel. Dust choked me. Sharp pieces of debris that hadn't cleared the bottom nails, shards of tile, chunks of concrete slashed at my jeans and jacket. I was tumbling, spinning, bouncing off the sides like a rag doll in a tornado. It felt like being digested by a plastic snake. I hit the bottom a pile of drywall dust and rubble inside a massive dumpster with a bone-jarring thud. A white cloud of dust exploded around me, blinding and choking. A second later, Julian landed beside me, groaning as the impact knocked the wind out of him. We scrambled out of the dumpster, coughing up white clouds of dust. We looked like ghosts, coated in gray powder from head to toe. We were in the unfinished basement parking garage. It was dark, lit only by temporary work lights that buzzed like angry hornets. "The outflow," I gasped, wiping grit from my eyes. "This way." I led him running through the maze of concrete pillars. We could hear the distant wail of sirens now. The police were coming. But in Medellin, the police were often just another gang with better uniforms. Julian couldn't risk being found here. I found the grate. It was heavy iron, rusted shut, set into the floor near the sump pump. "Move," Julian commanded. He didn't ask for a lever. He kicked it. Once, twice. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the concrete cavern. On the third kick, the rusted hinges snapped with a screech of tearing metal, and the grate clattered inward. The smell hit us first, rotting water, sewage, and old earth, the breath of the city's underbelly. We dropped down into the tunnel. The water was knee-deep, cold, and oily. It soaked through my pants instantly, chilling me to the bone. "This leads to the river," I whispered, my teeth chattering. "About 2 miles? Walk," Julian said, pulling his gun, a sleek black pistol I hadn't seen him draw, and checking the chamber. "And pray the rats are the only things down here." The trek through the sewer was the longest hour of my life. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the weak beam of Julian's phone light. The water sloshed around our legs, heavy and resistant. Every splash sounded like a footstep. Every dripping pipe sounded like a whisper. About halfway through, we heard it. A noise above us. Voices. Flashlight beams cutting through the grates in the ceiling, slicing down into our darkness like lasers. "Policia," a voice echoed from the street above. Julian slammed me against the curved brick wall, his hand clamping over my mouth. He killed the light on his phone. We stood in pitch blackness, pressed together in the sewage, listening to the boots walking on the grate 5 feet above our heads. I could feel his heart beating against my back. It wasn't racing. It was steady. Thump, thump, thump. He was calm. It was terrifying. A rat, wet and heavy, swam past my leg, brushing against my shin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vomit. But Julian's hand was iron on my mouth. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. The footsteps faded. The voices moved on. Julian released me. He didn't say sorry. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just clicked the light back on. "You chose this," he said suddenly, his voice echoing off the curved brick walls. "I chose survival," I snapped back, slipping on a patch of moss and barely catching myself. My anger was flaring now, burning through the fear. "No," he said, stopping to look at me. "You chose the dark. You could have stayed on the roof and waited for the police. You could have played the victim." "Oh, officer, I was kidnapped. They would have believed you. You have an honest face." "You have a clean record." He lowered the light so it wasn't blinding me. "Why didn't you?" I stood there, shivering in the sewage water, looking at the silhouette of the wolf. "Because I owe a debt," I said. "Debts are for banks," he scoffed. "People like us? We don't pay debts because we have to. We pay them because we want to stay in the game." He leaned in. "You liked it, didn't you? The roof, the puzzle, the danger, the feeling of being the smartest person in a room full of killers." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say I hated it, but the lies stuck in my throat. The fear on the roof had been terrifying, yes, but it had been real. It made the concerns of my normal life thesis papers, rent, bad dates seem like black and white TV compared to IMAX 3D. I felt alive in a way I never had in a lecture hall. "I didn't hate it," I admitted softly. Julian chuckled. a low sound that blended with the rushing water. Careful, architect. Once you start enjoying the chaos, the order becomes boring. And boring is a dangerous thing for a smart woman to be. We kept walking. The tunnel eventually widened, the air growing fresher but still carrying the tang of the river. We emerged under a bridge near the Medellin River, covered in filth, smelling like death, but alive. The backup SUV was there, waiting on the access road. As we climbed up the embankment, slipping on the mud, I realized Julian was right. The skyline of the city looked different now. It wasn't just lights and buildings. It was a facade, a mask, and I had just crawled through the guts behind the wall. I was dirty, I was exhausted, and I was terrified. But as I climbed into the clean leather seat of the SUV, leaving muddy prints on the floor mats, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't a beggar anymore. I was an accomplice. The driver floored it. We were thrown back against the leather seats as the heavy vehicle tore out of the construction site, weaving through traffic, putting concrete and steel between us and the rifle on the hill. Silence returned to the car, but it wasn't the cold silence of our first ride. It was the heavy, panting silence of survival. I looked at Julian. The wolf of Medellin was covered in gray dust. His expensive shirt was torn at the shoulder. There was a smear of blood on his cheek, maybe his, maybe mine. He looked at me, and for the first time, he looked human. Not a god, not a monster, just a man who had almost died. He started to laugh. It started as a wheeze, then rumbled into a deep, chest-shaking laugh. He wiped the blood from his cheek and looked at me with wild, bright eyes. "The tunnel?" he said, gasping for air. "You found the tunnel!" I stared at him, my chest heaving. "We almost died, and you're talking about the tunnel?" "We didn't die," he corrected, straightening his collar with shaking hands. "And because we didn't die, my men are currently cutting through the floor of that warehouse." My competitor was so busy watching the roof, he forgot to look at the floor. He leaned forward, invading my personal space, his intensity radiating like heat. "You didn't just find a weakness, architect. You created a diversion. You are dangerous." I looked down at my hands. They were covered in grease and concrete dust. They were shaking. But as I clenched them into fists, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't crying. I wasn't panicking. I was smiling. A small, hysterical smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I had tasted the fire, and I hadn't burned. The rest of the ride was a blur. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. When the SUV pulled up to my crumbling apartment building, the sun was setting. We had been gone for 3 hours. It felt like 3 years. Julian didn't get out this time. He rolled down the window as I stepped onto the curb. "The debt," I said, leaning down. "Is it paid?" Julian looked at me. He studied my face, the dirt on my nose, the new hardness in my eyes. "The debt is paid," he said softly. "We are even, Samantha." I nodded, turning to go. "But," he added. I stopped. "You are graduating soon," he said. It wasn't a question. "The world is full of boring buildings, Samantha. Full of load-bearing walls and safety regulations." He reached into his pocket. I braced myself for another black card. Instead, he pulled out a small silver pin. It was shaped like a wolf's head. He placed it in my hand. "If you ever get tired of building things that stand up," he whispered, "call me, and we will build things that change the world." The window rolled up. The black SUV slipped away into the traffic, disappearing into the veins of the city. 6 months later, I stood on the stage, the mortarboard cap heavy on my head. The dean called my name. "Samantha Valderrama, with honors." My parents were cheering in the crowd. My friends were clapping. I walked across the stage, took the diploma, and smiled for the camera. It was the happiest day of my life. It was supposed to be. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, the applause sounded muffled. The colors seemed dull. I felt bored. I walked back to my seat, clutching the piece of paper that said I was a qualified architect. I sat down and opened my small purse to put the diploma inside. There, pinned to the lining of my bag, was the silver wolf. I ran my thumb over the cold metal edges. I looked at the diploma. Then I looked at the pin. I knew where the warehouse was. I had seen it on the news the day after the raid. Police baffled by impossible heist, the headlines had said. No one knew how they got in, but I knew. I saw the tunnel in my mind. I saw the lines. I saw the blueprint of the city beneath the skin of the streets. I closed my purse. I wasn't just a student anymore. I wasn't just a victim who begged for help in a park. I was the girl who ran through fire. I was the girl who found the flaw. The wolf was right. The debt was paid. But the game? The game was just beginning.